My name is Magnus Emfel, working for the WWF as manager for climate innovations, and I will be moderating this discussion on the small topic of a new deal for the climate, a very big deal for Cleantech, where we want to highlight the current status and what's at stake for the new global climate change convention being negotiated, and which we assume, of course, will be a great one to be decided in Copenhagen, and what that means for the cleantech industry in terms of opportunities and challenges. To start this off and to put this into a bit of a context, I've invited our climate change program director, Stefan Henningsson, to give us an introduction about this. Please, Stefan.
Thank you, Magnus. Yes, I'm going to do just a first introduction to what is the new global climate deal all about then, and how can it, what are the things at stake in that. And if you are more interested in reading about this is a book written about this subject by Fred Pearce, a very good journalist, who's looking into the different building blocks on a new deal, and it's only like 35 pages, so it's quite a good, and it's in a good way if you're interested in the Copenhagen deal to get an insight what is actually discussed. If you're really interested in the subject, you can read the treaty that the NGO community has written already. So this is the basically suggestions for legal text for a climate treaty in Copenhagen that would manage to keep global warming well below 2 degrees, and what that would take. So that's in the Copenhagen Climate Treaty version 1.0. This is a living document, and this will be a living process also after Copenhagen. So this will be updated many, many times in the years to come. And as you see, it's not only WWF that has written this proposal for a climate treaty. And it's the first one that actually exists, like legal text as a proposal today. One of the most difficult things that the people, the thousands of delegates that are in Bangkok at the moment, is actually connecting all the dots when it comes to reducing emissions, to what kind of technologies we need to use in order to reduce emissions, how to help the people who are suffering the most, etc. Because what's being discussed is not so much incubators like Sting, and entrepreneurship is not a very common word in the negotiations. And we're trying to convey that message and opportunities within that, but it's very political, and it's the Kyoto Protocol that is running out now at 2012, with 37 countries committing to do 5% emissions reductions in about 20 years' time. Now is going to be replaced by the Copenhagen Treaty, or a parallel treaty with the Kyoto Protocol still moving on after 2013, where 192 countries are going to sign a joint deal on how to reduce what we believe is needed in order to stay below 2 degrees global warming, 80% by 2050. So as you see, the ambition for this global climate deal needs to be something completely new, a completely new level of ambition compared to what the Kyoto Protocol was. And so why do we do it? Basically, we have 3 pillars, you can say, that is discussed. It's how big temperature increase can and will the world cope with, and how to help those suffering. So this is a picture from Darfur, and a nation suffering from drought already, and how to help people suffering in the world in the future. Then it's about reducing emission, how to do it, how much should we do it, and in what way should we do it. And then how much should humanity now invest in doing this? How much money, basically. So more than 2 degrees, and where 2 degrees is more and more research is coming out and saying that's actually too much already when it comes to global warming. Research is saying that there's a risk if we come above 2 degrees, there's a risk for 3 billion refugees due to water shortage. There's a risk for coral reefs globally to disappear. Sea level rises, sometimes discussed up to 7 meters. The small island states, as an example, are actually not calling for 2 degrees even in negotiations, they're calling for maximum 1.5 degrees as global warming, and they're using research backing, like from the Stockholm Environment Institute, for example, in order to argue for that. But also adapting, as we've heard in the Climate Solver presentation earlier, helping people adapt to climate change is also a clean tech or a business opportunity. We heard about the Solvatten, for example, that is taking the sun and the energy from the sun to treat water in order to give people better access to water. That's also a business opportunity that will rise, and there will be a lot of money invested in helping poor people around the world. So let's not only focus on business opportunities when it comes to clean tech on reducing emissions, but also on helping people adapt to changes that are going to happen. And on the positive side, there is an increased global awareness around the world, from Beijing to Mexico to Stockholm to Rio de Janeiro, about how urgent this issue is. And I'm talking from the prime ministerial level. The awareness on that level has never been as big as it is now. And that's very positive. On the other hand, the momentum in the actual climate negotiations going on at the moment is not very good at all for Copenhagen. But 2 degrees Celsius was signed in July by all prime ministers in the major economies of the world as an ambition. And all the 17 biggest countries in the world signed up to that. So how to do it then, and how much should we do it, and who should do it? Well, at the top here, this is these are all the emissions at the moment. At the moment, we have more than 36 gigaton, which is what we're suggesting, and this is what we're talking about. There's some kind of global budget of emissions that we have left to emit during this century. And then by the end of the century, if we want to reach the 2-degree target, no more emissions. So it's quite easy in a way to look at it this way, rather than talking 2 degrees. That is very, what should I say, not very concrete in comparison. So we're suggesting that in order to go towards zero emissions, industrialized countries should lead the way and go to zero emissions already by 2050, and then developing countries can go to zero later on in this century. And this because there's a lot of talk about this, and you hear different numbers, like 40% is required by 2020. Industrialized countries have still not owned up to more than between 11 and 18% to 2020. And these kind of discussions are, of course, going on. And then, if we look at the left-hand side of this, down here, there will be so-called wedges in negotiation speak, which is, for example, solar heating would be one wedge. Energy efficiency in buildings would be one of the huge wedges. It's about 40% of energy requirement globally. So one of the biggest wedges, in order to replace the fossil emissions that we have here, we will have to have the new clean tech wedges that is making money, reducing emissions. In the same way that we made money in the last century, increasing emissions, we now need to make money going down. Fairly simple, in theory. So this is now talked a lot. For example, in parallel processes to the negotiations, there's major economies forum that is set up by the US government, for example, that is talking about exactly these kind of wedges, like technology action programs. Should we go globally between actors like China, India, US, and Europe, and South Africa to reduce costs for solar power, for example? That there will be a global, coordinated, collaborative push for that. Talks about setting up objectives for the global agreement in Copenhagen on what do we need to achieve by 2050. Do we need, in order to cope with this journey, do we need to have 75% renewables by 2050, as an example? Those kind of guidelines are being discussed. And of course, we have more ambitious guidelines than most of the people and the politicians in this, but definitely progress. And then there are talks when it comes to technology about, for example, intellectual property rights. where at the last negotiations, USA, they stated that we will not sign an agreement in Copenhagen that has got the word patents written into it. Whilst India is saying, we will not sign an agreement in Copenhagen that is not using patents in an innovative way to actually spread technologies quicker. So you have all these kind of conflicts, and this is a particular one that is particularly contentious where you have opposite views. And then deforestation, as mentioned earlier, is about 20% of a climate problem, but we're losing one of the major carbon sinks very, very quickly. And we need to stop deforestation, net deforestation, by 2020 is our view.